1:30, so we are on target as he always runs a very prompt courtroom. So back into the courtroom, Judge Gregory A. Adams on the bench.
Thank you, Mr. Clegg. Thank you, Ms. Hill. Ms. Sneiderman's back. Okay, so I got both lawyers, Ms. Sneiderman and let's bring the jury, please. Oh, there's the cameraman. He's back. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. You may be seated in the seat, make yourself comfortable. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, you can find your favorite seat. I see several of you have selected favorite seats. It's okay. You can sit anywhere you wish, as long as everyone has a seat. I see you starting to mark your seats with your notepad, so no one will sit in your seat, but I understand you can sit anywhere you want to. Technically, there are no assigned seats. As long as everyone has a seat, everyone can sit. All right, lawyers and parties, you may be seated. Thank you, Deputy Garrett, for your assistance as always. Ms. Carpenter, we're back on the record. Mr. Petrie, you may continue, sir.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Mr. Daniel, I believe that I was asking you about what you had reviewed, furnished to you in relation to this particular case. And I believe I asked you whether or not you had had an opportunity to review the historical cellular records for Mr. Newman's phone and Mrs. Sneiderman's phone with the cell tower locations. Did you receive that information, sir?
I did.
And were you also provided with certain, I guess, slides or printouts of evidence connected with testimony about these records from a previous trial?
Yes.
And were you also provided the testimony of the witness dealing with this area from a previous trial?
Yes.
Now, in this case, did you have the opportunity to review the actual slides or sketches, maps, whatever you call them, that were used in the previous trial in connection with the testimony from that trial?
Yes.
Okay. And were you able, based upon your review of the records that you have reviewed in this case, the historical cell phone records for Mr. Newman, Mrs. Sneiderman, the testimony of the previous witness, and the documentation and demonstrative evidence from that, have you formed certain opinions relating to how, whether or not you were able to place either of these two phones within a certain distance of each other at any given time during the period of time from July the 21st, 2010 to July the 23rd, 2010, sir, in the state of Colorado?
Yes.
Okay. Please tell us what you did, Mr. Daniel.
What I did is I took the historical call detail records for the two phones, and I plotted the locations of the cell towers that were used by the phones from Longmont, Colorado on those dates.
And let me show you, sir, what has previously been. May I approach the witness?
Yes, sir. You may. Yes, sir. You may approach.
79. I've got 72. On State's Exhibit 79, this is a case number from this trial, Mr. Daniel. I'm just going to ask you to look at that and tell me whether or not you have seen that prior to taking a stand here right now.
Yes.
Okay. And what do you recognize that as, sir?
This would be Ms. Sneiderman's phone and Mr. Newman's phones using the same cell tower and same sector for a tower in Longmont, Colorado.
And State's Exhibit number 80, sir, the same question. Have you seen that before?
Yes, I have.
And what do you recognize that as, sir?
This is the same thing. It's two phone calls, one from each phone, one at 7:26 a.m. and one at 6:29 a.m. using the same tower and the same sector on 7/23 of July 10th.
And on the State's Exhibit number 79, can you please tell us the phone call that had relayed in purple versus the one in red, what time was the phone call in purple, that is the one with the 1931 last four digits, Mrs. Sneiderman's number? What time was that phone call connected, sir?
At 7:02 a.m.
And what about the phone identified with Mr. Newman, the 3650 number, sir?
That was at 6:25 a.m.
Okay. And on State's Exhibit number 80, sir, same question. The first one would be directing you to the phone call used by number 1931, that is Mrs. Sneiderman's number. What time was that phone call, sir?
At 7:26 a.m.
And on that same exhibit number 80, the time of the phone call from Mr. Newman, that is the phone number ending in 3650.
That's at 6:29 a.m.
Okay. Now, do both State's Exhibits 79 and 80, sir, reflect that although those calls were made at different times, that they were made using the same cell tower?
Yes, they do.
Okay. Now, can you tell us, please, Mr. Daniel, whether or not, using your expertise and your training and your review of the materials in this case, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury whether or not any of the cell phone tower location data furnished to you in your expertise, you can tell us whether or not at any given time Mrs. Sneiderman and Mr. Newman were ever actually together in Longmont, Colorado?
Well, when you say together, you mean like together like in the same room?
Yes, sir.
No, you cannot.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, even looking at these two records, first of all, there's a time gap between the two calls. Secondly, even though they're using the same sector of the same tower, they could be a mile and a half apart.
Okay. And if there had been previous testimony that the individual sectors for those towers in Longmont should have arranged somewhere of a mile to a mile and a half, would you disagree with that statement as a generalization, sir?
As a generalization, that's a correct statement.
So the fact that both of the telephones are using the same tower at different times, does that allow you as an expert to say that they were ever together in the same room at the same time?
No, it does not.
Does that allow you to say anything other than within approximately 30 or 40 minutes of each other, they were approximately a mile and a half or less distant from where the other one had been?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, is that anything unique to these records, or is that a standard analysis for the cell towers in that location and what your review has shown you to be their range to be? In other words, is that always going to be true for every cell tower? Every cell tower is going to have a mile and a half range, or do cell tower ranges vary?
Cell tower ranges do vary, actually. They vary quite a bit. These cell towers have a range of a mile to a mile and a half.
Okay.
Generally speaking.
Okay. So in States Exhibits 79 and 80, again, the difference was between the two calls in State 79 was 6:25 in the morning for Mr. Newman and 7:02 for Mrs. Sneiderman. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
And in States Exhibit 80, Mr. Newman's phone was at 6:29 and Mrs. Sneiderman's was at 7:26. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
Okay. So is there anything, regardless of whether or not it's displayed in State 79 or 80, in your review of all the cell tower location information you were given and all the historical records of those phones, can you tell us, in addition to 79 and 80, was there anything that would allow someone with your expertise and experience and the data that you reviewed to say that at any time after leaving the Denver airport that Mrs. Sneiderman and Mr. Newman were ever in the same room together?
You can never say that from any set of records of this type,
Okay.
about any case.
Now, there have been some fairly highly publicized cases involving what I think I read, cell phone tower triangulation and pinpointing something. Is that at play at all in this case, sir?
No, sir. Triangulation requires the use of 3 towers, and it can only be done in real time. It has to be done by activating the emergency 911 system.
Okay, when you say it has to be done in real time, what does that mean?
That means that you have to go and get an order for the cell phone company to start pinging that phone.
At that time?
At that time, and it has to be done live. And they have to either use one of the 2 methods you can use to locate a phone in the 911 system. One is to triangulate it by using multiple cell towers and determining the location of the phone within some accuracy level, which is, by law, supposed to be 150 to 300 feet. In practicality, it's not that accurate. The other way to do it is to access the actual GPS chip in the phone if it has one.
Do all modern cell phones have a GPS chip?
Actually, they do not. Foreign cell phones don't have chips necessarily. The other thing is that you can turn off that function on your phone. So, like in my phone, I can turn off 911 assistance, and you cannot access a GPS chip in my phone.
So, do you know whether or not either of the cell phones involved in this analysis had a GPS function?
I don't know if they do or not.
Okay. Do you have any records indicating that any type of GPS record was made of the use of either of these phones?
No, sir, because those records would be different from what we have.
Okay. So the triangulation involves a different technology, and it's not historical records that you're looking at. Is that correct?
You can never triangulate a phone from a historical call detail record.
Okay. And a historical call detail record, what exactly is that?
What it is a record of a phone call that was used primarily for the purposes of the phone company. They use call detail records for the purpose of billing you for your time, billing other cell phone companies for you roaming in their areas. So it becomes a legal record of a transaction, basically. And then they record information about the tower usage for their own internal engineering purposes.
Now, let me, if I might approach again, Your Honor.
You may.
Let me show you some exhibits which I've shown Mrs. Cross. Did you want to see now that I've got numbers on them?
I saw them.
Okay. Show you some exhibits that have been marked as defense exhibits 39, 40, 41, 42, and 43. Just ask you to go through those as a group, and once you have gone through them, just look up and I've got a couple of questions for you, sir.
All right.
Have you had a chance, Mr. Daniel, to review defense exhibits 39 through 43, sir?
Yes,
And do you identify them, sir?
I do.
What do you identify defense exhibit number 39 as, please, sir?
This is a plot that I created based on the cell phone records for Hemi Newman and Andrea Sneiderman for 7/22/2010.
Okay. Does it show a particular time or a particular call that is, or calls that are reflected in that diagram, sir?
It does.
And what are those?
Well, the calls that are actually reflected here are some voice usage calls.
Voice usage calls?
Yes, like
That's a
phone calls, right. That are shown here in blue. And then we have some voice calls by Ms. Snyderman's phone that are shown here in yellow. And we have data usage by Mr. Newman's phone that is shown here in purple.
What is the difference between voice usage and data usage?
Well, in the AT&T system, they record the cell tower that was used for voice calls, text messaging, and data usage by your phone. Data usage being connections to the internet, email, things like that.
And the state of defense exhibit number 39, does that show that two different towers or more than two different towers are being used for the various phone calls and data usage, sir?
Yes, it does.
As far as the data usage, by whose phone was that?
That was Hemi Newman's phone.
Okay. And can you tell us Was that tower the same tower that the voice usage for Mr. Newman is reflected in defense exhibit number 39, sir?
Well, he has data usage on a tower southeast of Longmont at 4:25 a.m. or 4:30 a.m. And then he has data usage again at 6:28 on a different tower up in Longmont, which is the same tower used for some voice calls at that time.
And how far apart are those two towers, if you can tell us? That may not have been something you plotted.
Those towers are about 9 miles apart.
Okay. Now, defense exhibit number 40, sir. Can you tell us what that depicts?
Yes, this is phone activity for 7/22/2010. It shows a phone call for the Sneiderman phone that is at 7:02 a.m. using two different towers.
What does that indicate to you at all, that phone call was using two different towers?
Well, if a phone call starts on one tower and continues or ends on a different tower, and AT&T is very unique in this situation where, and typically when you're looking at call detail records, you might get a starting and an ending cell tower. AT&T will record all the tower activity for tower changes for the whole phone call, okay? In this case, make sure I'm looking at the right one again.
And again, that's defense 40?
That's correct, defense 40. So she has a call that is on the tower to the east and another one that's over by the Longmont Airport. And for that to be the case, then she either has to be moving from one tower to the other, or she can be in between the two towers in a shared coverage area.
And you can't tell which is the case by looking at the historical records, is that correct, sir?
No, you cannot.
On these sketches, sir, did you mark for us where the Hampton Inn is?
I did.
And how did you delineate that on these sketches, sir, or these maps?
It's a little orange balloon with an H in it.
Okay. And did you mark where appropriate where the GE facility is in Longmont?
I did. It's an orange balloon with a G in it.
Okay. H, Hampton, and G for GE?
That's correct.
Now let me show you Defendant's Exhibit 41, please, sir. Can you tell us what that depicts?
This depicts a phone call by Andrea Sneiderman's phone that starts at 7:02 a.m. It lasts for 8 minutes and 48 seconds. It begins and ends on the southwest side of the tower near the Hampton Inn. It also has a continuation of that call on the tower that's by the Longmont Airport, which is west of the GE office.
And again, the fact that there were different towers utilized during the duration of that telephone call, does that tell you whether or not the phone was moving or simply in between the towers?
Well, in this case, because it starts and ends on one tower, but it has another tower in the middle, then it's more likely that it's kind of in between the two towers and just switching back and forth.
Defense Exhibit number 42, please, Mr. Daniel. Again, look at it and tell us what you recognize it as.
This is voice call activity for the morning of July 23rd, 2010 for Hemi Newman's phone. He has a call that starts at 6:29 a.m. And it lasts for 165 minutes. It begins on the west side of the tower close to the Hampton Inn, and it ends on a tower far north of the actual GE office.
Are there any other calls reflected in that particular exhibit state of Defendant's 42, sir?
No.
Can you tell from the records that you reviewed in this case, Mr. Daniel, whether or not that was the phone moving or in between towers?
Well, in this case, again, it could be in between towers or it could be moving. And I'd have to see the actual record detail to determine if it changed towers in between or just stayed on those towers the whole time.
But if you are in between two towers and one signal gets a better quality, even temporarily, than the one you started out with, the phone will automatically switch or could automatically switch?
It can switch to simply by you turning your head.
Okay. Defendant's Exhibit 43, please, sir.
All right, this is for July 23rd of 2010. It shows activity for Andrea Sneiderman's phone. And we have a call that begins and ends on the tower northeast of the Hampton Inn at 7:26 a.m. and then it continues on the tower due south of the GE office, and it also continues on the tower that is over by the Longmont Airport. So in this case, if I were to guess, based on the activity of it using 3 different towers for the same 49-second call.
Don't guess unless that is a supposition based upon your expertise and training and review of the evidence.
Well, based on this kind of activity, using 3 towers, in my opinion as an expert, I would say the phone is most likely located near the GE office because it's centrally located between the 3 towers.
Your Honor, at this time, I would tender defense exhibits 39 through 43.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, 39 through 43 is a without objection. You may publish them to the jury if you wish.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're
And, Your
welcome.
Honor, may I ask permission for, at this point, for Mr. Daniel to step down to mark on the elbow?
Oh, you may, yes, sir, you may come on down. Now, come on around.
And Mr. Williams will help you display these.
All right, you can come on up, Mr. Williams.
Oh, you do have them in the trial record? Your Honor, I understand
We're back
that
on the record. Yes, sir.
Mr. Williams has done it on, he can do it on the big screen.
Oh, that's fine, that's fine.
With a better resolution.
That's
Mr.
fine.
Daniel,
Ms. Daniel, you can come on back to the witness stand.
Order you back up there.
Come on back up. All right, he's in position. You can look at the large screen or the screen over here, Mr. Daniels, either one.
All right.
It should come up
Yes, sir.
in a moment, excuse me, on either one. Whatever makes you feel comfortable.
And Your Honor, if I might,
You might.
just point out that this is Defendant's Exhibit 39. The one that's being displayed right now does not have the sticker, but this is Defendant's Exhibit 39.
39. And you can touch the screen, Mr. Daniels, and it will leave a
Okay.
notation. And they'll show you how to clear it momentarily.
So you, a few moments ago, Mr. Daniel, you indicated what this shows in terms of activity as well as location. If you could explain this using the screen as you can, sir.
All right. If I can see it, it's a little blurry. Well, what we have is we have data usage down here, and I think that's right, that marks it. And then we have that phone using this data usage for the tower up here at 4:38 a.m. That's the one down at the bottom, so I don't know why that got big. How do I fix it?
And Mr. Williams is showing on.
All right, thank you. All right. So it moves in this direction to this tower and connects for data here at 6:25 a.m. I can't read this. And there's also a phone call by Mr. Newman's phone on that same tower within 3 minutes, I believe, if I remember that slide correctly, because I can't see it here.
Okay, you know what I'm going to do?
You can give him the slide.
Let me give you
You can
these.
see the paper.
That'll work.
Okay.
Can you see that better?
I can.
All right.
And just review that, and
Yes, okay.
did
So
your eyes fail you, or were you pretty accurate?
no, ours was pretty accurate. The data usage is at 6:28 on this tower, and then the phone call starts on this tower at 6:25, the same tower.
Okay. And Defense Exhibit number 40, sir. And this was Mr. Newman's phone, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And if you would, just flip that page over. And Mr. Williams, if you could do the next one.
That's going to be 40.
This would be Defendant's Exhibit 40, Your Honor.
All right.
And for Mr. Williams, that would have a number 7 at the bottom of the page.
Okay.
And I think if you tap your screen, Mr. Daniels, at the bottom, it should erase it. Oh, the left or right side. Try the other side. Oh,
All right.
all right, it is clear.
All right.
You
Yes.
can start over.
Okay.
Defense 40, sir.
All right. This slide is for 7/22/2010. And we have a phone call here that, for Mr. Newman's phone, that begins at 6:25 a.m. And it begins on this tower right here. Okay? And then it continues on this tower over here. And then it ends on this tower back where it started.
Same call. It's not like there's a call, and another call, and another call. This is one continuous call.
That's correct, for 3 minutes and 8 seconds.
And for the purpose of, for the benefit of the jury, could you show us where on this the Hampton Inn and the GE plant are, please, sir?
Yes, the Hampton Inn is right here. And
That's the H.
That's the H, and the GE plant is right here.
The G.
That's correct.
Okay. And the next one, then, please, sir, defense exhibit number 41.
Okay,
And that's, what is the bottom?
number 9.
Number 9, is that what you have, Mr. Williams? Thanks, sir. Please continue,
All right.
Mr. Daniel.
You have to tap the bottom if you want to use it.
There we go, okay.
I can start.
All right, this is for 7/22/2010, and this is the phone activity for Andrea Sneiderman's phone. There's a phone call that begins and ends on the southwest side of this tower at 7:02 a.m. for 8 minutes and 48 seconds. It also continues on the southeast side of this tower. So it starts here, and continues here, and then ends back on this tower.
And on this particular slide, where is the Hampton Inn?
The Hampton Inn is actually south of that. It's right here. And then the G office is right here. That's the GE office.
Okay. And then next would be, sir, please, defense exhibit number 43. Mr. Williams, that should be at number 12 at the bottom.
14.
14 at the bottom.
You said 43, Mr. Petrie? That's what you
Did I
want?
skip over 4? Did I skip over one?
You skipped 42.
Oh, I skipped 42.
If you want to go in sequential order, you missed 42, but you don't have to.
I'm trying to read my writing upside down. So it's 42, number 12, please, Mr. Williams. Can you give us a tap there, please, Mr. Daniel?
Ms. Carpenter, would you tap the screen?
I think I figured it out.
Oh, okay, great, now. Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Dan, you can tap the screen.
All right. This slide is for 7/23/2010. It shows a phone call for the Hemi Newman phone. And it begins on the west side of this tower. And it continues for 165 minutes. And it ends on the south side of this tower.
And you're drawing roughly, I hate to use it, the pieces of the pie up there is roughly.
Well, those are not really pieces of the pie, but it gives you some idea of the direction of the antenna.
The upside down V's are, that's showing something in regards to the directionality.
That's correct. And then the GE office is right here, and the Hampton Inn is over here.
Any other calls depicted in Defense Exhibit 42, sir?
There are not.
Okay. And then Defense Exhibit number 43, sir, if you would make sure we got the right little number in the bottom right.
14.
Number 14.
14. Tap the screen. There you go. Thank you.
I will have mastered this technology by the time we're done. All right, this is a slide depicting phone call activity for 7/23/2010. We have a call from Andrea Sneiderman to Rusty Sneiderman that begins at 7:26 a.m. and lasts for 49 seconds. It begins and ends, that's correct, on this tower, and it continues on this tower. It also has a continuation on this tower. So for 49 seconds, it's used all three towers. The GE office is right here, centrally located between the three towers, and then the Hampton Inn is to the southeast, which would put it too far away from that Longmont tower to be used typically.
Okay. Now,
Longmont Airport Tower.
whether or not you or anyone else for the state or defense or anyone else prepared a slide or sketch, diagram, map, whatever you want to call it, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please, Mr. Daniel, whether or not any of the calls that you reviewed in connection with the July 21st, 22nd, 23rd in Longmont, Colorado, whether or not any of those calls or data usage historical records can establish that Mrs. Sneiderman and Mr. Newman were ever in the same room together?
No, sir, no one can do that.
Can you even tell us whether or not any of those records even establish that they were ever in the same building together?
Unless it's an extremely large building, no, sir.
When you say extremely large,
Like an airport.
okay. I don't have any idea how big the Longmont, Colorado airport is. Do you?
No, sir, but it has a cell tower at the airport, and that cell tower appears to be one that just acts as part of the system in Longmont.
Now, Mr. Daniel, at our request, did you review some historical call data records from November the 18th, 2010 for Mrs. Sneiderman's phone?
I did.
And in particular, did you look at a couple of calls, I want to say it was like 9:58 and 10:06 or 10:02 from Mrs. Sneiderman's phone in the Dunwoody, Georgia area, sir?
I did.
What can you tell us based upon your analysis of that call, historical data, sir, about where she was exactly, whether or not she was moving?
Well, both those calls use the same tower, which, if I remember correctly, are slightly north of the Sneiderman residence. They don't indicate movement, and obviously you can't precisely place the phone from that.
Okay. Do you recall where those calls were in relation to the Dunwoody Prep Child Care Center, sir?
I don't know where that is, sir.
Okay. But you do know where her home was?
I do. I had that mapped.
Okay. And approximately how far from her home were those calls made, sir?
The tower is about a mile from the house.
Okay. Now, these were two separate calls. This, unlike what we looked at in some of the Longmont data where you've got a long call that starts at this tower, moves to this tower, and moves back to this tower. Those are two separate and distinct phone calls that we're talking about on November the 18th near her house. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
So two distinct phone calls utilizing the same tower.
That's correct.
And you cannot tell us whether or not she was moving at that time. Or,
No.
I take that back. You can't tell us whether or not that telephone was moving at the time.
That's correct.
And you cannot tell us what direction, if that cell phone was in a car, what direction that car was headed in.
You can't tell that from a single point in any case.
One moment, please, Your Honor.
You may. All right, Ms. Carpenter, we're back on the record. Ms. Peach, you may continue, sir.
Yes, sir, Your Honor. That's all I have of Mr. Daniel at this time.
All right. Ms. Cross, you may proceed if you wish.
Thank you. Are the defense exhibits that you referenced, Mr. Daniel, are they up there in front of you?
They are.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, ma'am, you may.
Grab those for me. Sure. All right, Mr. Daniel.
I snatched one of yours.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Daniel, you talked about kind of the immutable rules, that there's nothing that says for 100% guaranteed certain that the cell phone call I'm making is being routed to or through the cell phone tower closest to me. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. You talked about lots of different reasons why. Could be the volume of calls, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, can you answer?
Yes.
Thank you. And it could be the geography, the terrain, things like that?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there anything in any of the records that you reviewed for your testimony today that indicates that any of those aberrations occurred in any of the calls that we're talking about?
One of the issues with call detail records is you never know why the tower was picked.
Please listen to my question.
Okay.
Is it true that in the records you reviewed for your testimony today, you don't have any evidence that any of those aberrations occurred in any of the calls that we're talking about today?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I'm looking at your slides, and I listened closely to your testimony, and as I understand it, your review of the record confirms for you that the defendant, Andrea Sneiderman's phone, was in use in Longmont, Colorado from July 21st through July 23rd, 2010. Is that right?
Yes.
And it's your testimony after the review of the records that Hemi Newman's phone was in use in Longmont, Colorado on July 21st through July 23rd, 2010. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So there's no dispute about that?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And for the bulk of the time they were there, their calls were, the calls that they were making and receiving were coming to and from the same cell site tower, is that right?
Yes.
And the same sector of that cell site tower, is that right?
No.
Explain that for me.
Well, not all the phone calls are on the same tower sectors, so
They were all on the same tower site?
that's correct.
Okay. So is that, and that's consistent, isn't it, with the two of them being in the same location for the times that they are making those calls?
In the same location being Longmont, yes.
Okay, listen to my question, please. The information that you reviewed is consistent with the two of them being in the same location throughout the time that they were in Longmont, is that right? With a few aberrations, you let us know about one or two calls that they were separated, but the majority of the time, both of them are using the same cell site tower, is that correct?
Well, I think I need for you to define what you mean by location.
I'm asking you. Let me ask you a different way, Mr. Daniel. If two people were sharing a room together for a period of 48 hours, a hotel room, would you expect their phone calls to utilize the same cell site tower?
That's possible, yes.
It's more than possible, isn't it? Isn't it probable?
It's probable.
You've talked about all the variations, but we're not talking about variations. I'm talking about your general expectation. Your general expectation would be that two people sharing the same room would be utilizing the same cell site tower. Is that correct?
Yes.
One of your slides talked about, and when I'm talking about, we're talking about cell phone calls, voice calls, and I'm talking about text messages being sent or received. Do you understand my questions that way?
I do.
Okay. You talked in one of your slides, at slide number 39, Defense Exhibit number 39, talked and references data usage, phone data usage.
That's correct.
Is that correct? Now, you recognize, of course, that these records and these phones were being serviced by AT&T in July of 2010. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you're aware, of course, of the difficulty and the reliability of the data usage for AT&T location information. Is that right?
Yes.
Why, let me ask another way. Despite knowing about the difficulty with the reliability of the data usage information, as opposed to the phone call information, as opposed to the text message information, you chose to include that information on your your Defense Exhibit number 39. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Your background, as I understand it, is in computer forensics. Is that right?
I do have background in computer forensics,
Okay,
yes.
and that the majority of your career has been spent in that field. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, and it's only in the last, 3 years?
About 3 years. yes.
About 3 years that you've been doing this type of work. How much do you charge? You're not donating your services, is that right?
No, ma'am, I never done. Well, I do donate. No, not this time.
Not in this case? Okay.
No.
Can you tell me how much you're being paid for your services here today testifying in court?
Me personally, or what the company's charging for it? It's two different things.
Why don't you give me both?
Well, I make about $35 an hour,
And how much is your company charging for your testimony today?
$2.50 an hour.
And can you tell me how much your company has billed to date for your services in this case?
I don't do the accounting, so I can give you an estimate.
Estimate for me, please.
Maybe $8,000.
Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Daniel.
Mr. Petrie, any redirect?
Yes, sir, Your Honor.
You may.
Mr. Daniel, Mrs. Cross asked you, is there anything in the records and the evaluation you did that would be inconsistent with the two individual phones being in the same room at the same time, correct?
I believe that's
Words
what-
to that effect.
Yes.
It's not a verbatim. These, they could have been in the same room together without any cell phones, correct?
Yes,
They could be in the same town together without any cell phones, correct?
that's correct.
Is it any more likely, based, and I'm not talking about a layman's opinion, I'm talking from the scientific data that you have reviewed and your expertise, can you tell this jury, is it any more likely, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that those two phones were in the same room as opposed to simply being within 1.5 miles of each other?
If I understand the question correctly, it is not any more likely for them to be in one place together than within just the general area of the cell tower.
And that's all you can tell with this?
That's all you can tell with this technology.
It ain't triangulation,
It is not triangulation.
and it's not GPS?
It is not GPS.
Thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Lawyers, may Mr. Daines be released and excused from his subpoena, or do you want to remain in subpoena, Mr.
We would ask that he be excused, Your Honor, with the caveat that once he's excused, he would be out of state. So
I understand that the state has no objection.
All right.
then we ask that he be excused.
All right, you may be excused. Have a good day. Catch
Thank you.
straight. Have a nice flight.
Thank you, sir.
All right, take care. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, would the defense would call Samantha Archer Wright to the witness stand?
You may.
Oh.
Your Honor, the witness is in the restroom. She's walking down the hall now. I did not go get her.
No, I do not need that.
I understand. I appreciate it. Thank you. Come on up, young lady. Deputy Garrett's going to swear you in. Follow his instructions.
Raise your right hand. I solemnly swear affirm that the charge of this court should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You may be seated. Please state your spelling name for the record.
Samantha Archer Wright, SAMANTHAARCHER-WRIGHT.
Ms. Archer Wright, my name is Tom Clegg. I am one of Ms. Sneiderman's attorneys, and I'm going to ask you a series of questions, okay?
Okay,
If you would please speak into the microphone so we can be sure to hear everything you have to say.
okay,
Do you know the defendant in this case, Mrs. Andrea Sneiderman?
yes,
Do you see her in this courtroom here today?
yes.
Could you point her out and describe to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and for the record what she is wearing?
She's sitting to the left and she has on a tan sweater.
Okay. Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant, Andrea Sneiderman.
Record may so reflect.
Okay. How is it that you know Andrea Sneiderman, ma'am?
I was a nanny for her.
Okay. And when you say you were a nanny for her, were you a nanny for both she and her husband for a period of time as well?
Yes.
Okay. When did you actually first meet Andrea and Rusty Sneiderman?
I met Andrea August of 2008 and then again October 2008. She interviewed me in August and then I began being her nanny in October 2008.
And did you actually begin working as a nanny in October of 2008?
Yes.
Once you began working for them as a nanny, how often or how frequently were you working, ma'am?
3 days a week for about 6 hours a day.
And would you have been located physically in their household during that period of time?
Yes.
Where were they living at that time?
In Dunwoody.
Okay. Would all of your contact with Mrs. Sneiderman and Mr. Sneiderman have been at the house that they maintained in Dunwoody?
Yes.
You said you worked 3 days a week, 5 or 6 hours a day?
Yes.
When, typically, what days would you week? Was it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or do you recall?
I don't remember. I believe it was like Tuesday, Thursday, Friday.
I apologize for that. Would you secure that phone, Deputy Garrett? I apologize for the interruption. I apologize, sir. Go ahead. I apologize. Can
Yes,
you
ma'am.
restate that? Restate,
Okay,
you
let me
asked that
restate
question?
the question if I can remember what it was, okay? How, you said you worked 3 days a week. Do you recall the specific schedule that you would have been working at that time, ma'am?
I think it was like either Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or Monday, Thursday, Friday. I don't remember exactly, but I knew it was 3 days a week.
Typically, what hours would you have been in their household?
9:30 to 3:30.
Okay. That's 9:30 in the morning to 3:30 in the afternoon.
Yes.
Okay. Would you have had occasion to come into contact with both Rusty and Andrea Sneiderman during that period of time?
Yes.
Would you have had occasion to come into contact with them as a couple?
Yes.
How long did you actually continue to work for Rusty and Andrea Sneiderman?
For about 4 years total.
Now, at some point, did you cut back in 2010?
Yes.
When is it that you cut back in 2010?
I believe it was the summer because of school.
Okay, and were you in school at that time?
Yes.
From October of 2008 until the summer of 2010, were you consistently at their home?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have an opportunity to observe the two of them interact with one another?
Yes.
Can you describe that interaction, please, ma'am, for the jury?
They were always happy, communicating with each other, very open, joking. They talked with me. We talked about stuff. We laughed together.
Okay. Did they include you in their conversations?
Yes, they did.
How frequently would it be that they would include you in their conversations, ma'am?
Every day that I was there, anytime we were all around each other, we'd all talk about something.
Okay. Was Mr. Sneiderman employed during that period of time?
Yes.
Okay, and was Mrs. Sneiderman working outside of the home during that period of time?
In 2010?
2008, up until about the time you left.
No,
Okay.
not that I recall.
Was there a period of time where she would have begun working for General Electric, if you recall?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall when that would have been? And if you don't, that's fine.
No, I don't remember exactly when.
Did you ever have occasion to share meals with the Sneidermans?
Yes. Yes.
While you were there, how many kids did they actually have, ma'am?
2.
Okay. Can you describe the interaction between the two of them that you observed specifically in the early portion of the year 2010?
They were happy. Very happy.
Did you notice any sort of tension between the two of them?
No.
Did you notice either one of them declining to speak to the other?
No.
Did you ever notice any sort of arguments in your presence concerning the two of them?
No.
Okay. Did they appear to be devoted to one another?
Yes.
What were their, did you have occasion, or at some point, did you cut back and stop working for them to the extent that you had previously been working for them?
Yes.
When would that have been, ma'am?
I think it was the summer of 2010. I can't remember exactly when.
You went back to school, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall when school would have begun in the summer of 2010?
I think the end of May, sometime in May.
Did you continue to nonetheless have contact with them after you cut back?
Yes.
Can you describe the contact or the extent of the contact that you would have had with the two of them after you went back to school?
Well, I spoke to Andrea via email, and I think maybe 1 or 2 times I went by the house.
Okay. Did you actually continue to work for them at that time, or did you simply stop working for them at all? Did you work part-time for them, or did you work at all for them?
That summer?
Yeah.
I don't think I was there very often that summer, no.
Do you recall, you indicated you went by the house 1 or 2 times after you began school?
Mm-hmm.
You could speak yes or no, so the
Yes.
reporter can get it down, please, ma'am. Yeah. Do you recall whether you would have seen Andrea, Rusty, or both Andrea and Rusty at that time, ma'am?
I believe seeing them both.
Okay. Can you describe their interaction on those 2 occasions when you dropped by the house during the summer of 2010 with each other?
It was the same. They were still happy, just Andrea and Rusty.
Was there anything that you noticed that appeared to be out of the ordinary?
No.
Did you notice any sort of arguments between the two of them at that time?
No.
Where were you on November the 18th of 2010, ma'am?
I was at the hospital in my clinical rotation.
I'm sorry?
I was at the hospital in my clinical rotation.
When you say the hospital, that would not have been Atlanta Medical Center.
No.
Okay. Did you find out at some point during the course of that particular day that Rusty had been shot?
Yes.
What did you do after finding out that Rusty had been shot? Or did you go over to the Sneiderman household?
Not that day.
Okay. Do you recall when you would have gone over to the Sneiderman household?
The next morning.
Okay. Did you have occasion to come into contact with Andrea Sneiderman on that particular day?
Yes.
Can you describe, as you observed it, her emotional state and condition on the 19th of November of 2010, ma'am?
She was distraught, crying, hurt, just very, very distraught.
How much time did you spend with her on that particular day, if you recall?
I was at the house the entire day.
Okay. Did her mood change or become better during the course of the day?
No,
Okay. Were you able to carry on a conversation with her?
no, not.
To your recollection, did she ever stop crying for a significant period of time?
Not that I can recall.
Do you have any recollection of any representatives of the Dunwoody Police Department coming by the house on the 19th of November while you were there?
If they did, I'm not sure.
Perfectly.
That day particular, I'm not sure.
Okay. Did you have occasion after that particular day to have much contact with Andrea for the rest of the year 2010?
Yes,
Okay. Did you go back to work for her at some point?
yes.
When is it that you went back to work for her, ma'am?
Immediately after, I was still with the family.
Okay. When you say immediately after, would that be immediately after Rusty's death?
I was there once a week, yeah,
Okay. Had you been there once a week prior to that time?
yes,
Okay. So I'm making sure I understand. You had been working at their home 3 days a week.
correct,
At some point, did you cut back to working at their home once a week?
correct.
When is it that you were working at their home once a week?
After that summer semester, by the fall, maybe September, it was once a week.
Okay. So you resumed working at their house once a week while Rusty was still alive.
Yes,
Would you have had, during that period of time, an opportunity to observe the two of them together as a couple?
yes.
Can you describe the interactions you would have observed after you went back to working at their house sometime in the fall of 2010?
They were still very happy.
Okay. Did you, again, during that period of time, notice anything out of the ordinary?
No,
Did you notice any sort of tension between the two?
no,
Were they arguing?
no.
After Rusty's death, did you continue to work for Mrs. Sneiderman?
Yes.
How long did you continue to work for Mrs. Sneiderman?
Until I was told that I was a witness and I couldn't communicate with her anymore.
Okay.
I believe it was after her arrest.
Would that have been sometime in the year 2012?
Yes.
Can you describe for us the emotional condition of Mrs. Sneiderman during the part of November of 2010 after the death of her husband and her emotional state as you observed it during December of 2010?
She was still distraught,
Okay. What led you to draw that conclusion?
crying, sad. She just wasn't herself.
Had you ever seen her like that before?
No.
Did you continue to work when you continued to work for her, were you just working once a week, or did your schedule change at some point?
It changed. It was more like twice a week, about twice a week.
And did that remain the case up until the time when you stopped having contact with her sometime in the year 2012?
Yes.
Did you have any sort of email communication with her in December of 2010, ma'am?
No, I don't believe so.
Mark, this is, what is the next one, 44?
Number 44? All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is a good pause point. This is defense exhibit number 44. Let me go ahead and give you these instructions. Do not discuss the case or allow anyone to discuss the case with you while you're on this break. Do not remain upon the 5th floor because I don't want you to hear anything you should not hear. If you do decide to have a meal here in the dedicated area, do not sit near anyone who may be talking about this case or allow anyone to sit near you who may be talking about the case. Your options are you can move away from them or ask them to move away from you. Do not read or look at any media coverage pertaining to this case. Do not go upon the internet.
All right, everyone, welcome back to 11 Alive's continuous coverage.